Hi, it's Tuesday, July 15th, Wednesday, July 16th in Eastern Asia, and we have a lot to talk about in the tropics today. The first one is Invest 93L in northeastern Florida. The system is forecast to track west and may form into a tropical depression or storm before coming into the central Gulf Coast later this week. We've also got Invest 96W in the Western Pacific. The system's sitting in the Philippine Sea right now, and this is likely to form as it tracks northwest and comes towards Taiwan and the Philippines. And it could be a significant impact for a lot of areas in Eastern Asia as we go throughout the next week. And we'll talk about this one in depth in a little bit. And I'll leave a timestamp if you want to skip ahead to this part of the video initially, as we are going to start off in the Atlantic with Invest 93L. Again, sitting over northeastern Florida this evening, you can see the center of circulation here just south of Jacksonville with some convection on the southwest side. And honestly, this does look very close to being a tropical depression right now. I'm not sure it meets the 12-hour criteria that the Hurricane Center usually goes with convection sustainment. But if it sustains for another 6 hours, I think it's a reasonable call that this would be a tropical depression, even though it is over land. Now, even though it is doing pretty good right now, it does have a pretty big obstacle ahead of it imminently, and that's that the low-level center is currently tracking more northwest, and you can see where it is on this latitude line. It's at about 30 north right now, and that's not a lot of ground to move back over water into the northern Gulf. You can see at this current trajectory, we're moving more into northern Florida or southwestern Georgia, and a lot of models have been expecting this because we have some different flows between different heights of the atmosphere. I can show you this if we look at the model guidance. Let me go back to the beginning of where we are now. You can see this is by Tuesday morning. So this is this morning. And we can see we have a subtropical ridge over the western Atlantic, and this is pushing the system further northwest because we have this more southeasterly flow with this subtropical ridge. But if we go up into the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere, we have a different ridge over the deep south. You can see this is more oriented directly on top of Invest 93, and this has more of a northeasterly flow. And this is shearing the system right now as well. You can see all the convection on the southwest side of that, highlighting that northeasterly shear. But this is also beginning to decouple, not beginning, but it has been decoupling the mid-level and the low-level center all day. You can see that the low-level center is, again, on the northeast side of all this convection. This is where the mid-level center is as well. So there's a vertical tilt with height with this. And the question is right now, can this mid-level center tug this a little bit more south so that it maintains a trajectory a little bit more west than northwest? We've maybe seen a little bit of a trend of that in short term. You can see more of this convection covering this low level center, maybe just a convective burst that covered the low level center, but maybe also an attempt at this mid level center tugging the low level center a little bit more south into the convection. Now, models have been a little bit split on exactly how far inland this goes. If we're comparing what models had wanted this afternoon compared to where we are now, I think the European has a better handle because you can see the GFS had this coming in around Jacksonville or a little north of there. This has come in south of Jacksonville, and the European also showed that. It showed it coming in south of Jacksonville on its afternoon run, and it maintains it a little bit further south. This is near the Big Bend region of Florida. This might be more suitable for the system to develop because this is so important because it won't have a lot of time over the eastern Gulf. And if the system center does move overland like the GFS had shown, the mid-level center, which is going to move back over offshore regardless because of that northeasterly flow, is going to have to start from scratch if this low-level center is too far away and decays inland. And that process is pretty gradual. You can see on the GFS in this instance, with that low-level center dying over land, it really just does not have time to do that. It really just barely gets a closed area flow pressure as it's making landfall in Louisiana, and this would be a case where we don't actually get a tropical depression storm forming. But the European being a little bit closer to the coast and closer to reality, I think, right now with where the low-level center is tracking right now, with it being a little bit closer, it's able to come back offshore for a time, and we see the system actually try to become a tropical depression on the model before coming into southeastern Louisiana. It might be a bit iffy if this is actually a tropical depression or not on the model, but it's definitely a better chance on the European model in this case than the GFS had shown with its scenario of where the low-level center goes over the next 12 to 18 hours. And really, this is just a watch and wait type thing. I do think right now the European has a better handle on this, but this is also a very close call. You can see this low-level center is riding right along the panhandle of Florida. A little nudge north, and it's pretty far inland, and that may just hinder development odds entirely. Whereas a little shift south could put it directly over the Gulf, and that could drastically raise odds of development. But it's a real-time watch thing. Now, something that will not change if this is a trough or a tropical depression when it comes in is really the entire impacts in the central Gulf Coast. We do have a lot of warm water here across the northern Gulf, excuse me. And that's going to allow the system to have a lot of moisture to work with when it comes into the central Gulf Coast. And for that reason, we're expecting a lot of rainfall, even if the system is just an invest when it comes in. And you can see anywhere in the red here is 3 inches of rain or more. And we have, even in central Louisiana, some spots of 4, 5, 6 inches of rain showing up here. And this is falling in a fairly short period of time in the matter of a couple of days. And that could easily lead to a lot of flooding issues in central Louisiana. And for that reason, we have a moderate risk of flash flooding from the Weather Prediction Center in central Louisiana. And that is an issue because we've certainly seen this month with storms like Tropical Storm Chantal that flooding can easily become the big issue, even if wind is not really an issue at all. And unfortunately, we may be looking at another significant flooding risk here in central Louisiana. So the most important thing to do as the system continues tracking west is that we don't focus on, is the system a tropical depression, is it a named storm, or is it just an invest? Focus on the impacts and focus on that we have the likelihood of very heavy rainfall coming in here to the central Gulf Coast as we head into the latter half of the week and into the weekend. And it's important to stay tuned to the Hurricane Center outlooks and your local forecast office for the latest information local to you as the system comes west. Your local forecast office will also issue flash flood watches and flash flood warnings if necessary. And if those are issued, you need to know when they are issued. So make sure you have alerts on your phone activated. There's several weather apps, local weather stations will have those apps, so you can get those alerts immediately so that you're aware of it in case there are some flooding issues that you need to be aware of. Now, as for the tropical genesis side of this, the Hurricane Center currently gives us a medium chance, about a 40% chance of developing into a tropical depression or storm. And that seems about right with the uncertainties that I just discussed a little bit ago. And we may see this rise or decrease in the next 12 to 18 hours as we continue seeing the real-time trends with this system. But stay safe in the central Gulf Coast as the system does track further west. I'll try to have more videos on this week and into the weekend as the system does continue tracking west. But that's not the only system we have in the tropics active. We have 2 others that I want to discuss. One is very brief. It's in the southern hemisphere of all places to be talking about in July. This is peak winter months for the southern hemisphere, but we do have a tropical system forming in all likelihood in the southwest Indian Ocean. You can see this is Invest 90S with a well-defined circulation, and this is right on the border of the Australian region and southwest Indian Ocean. This will be tracking south and west, moving away from any of the islands further east. This is not a land threat in any respect, but this is likely very close to being the first tropical cyclone of the 2025 to 2026 cyclone season, which started on July 1st. And if this does, a little note about this with the systems that we have in place for tracking these systems, if the system does get designated as a tropical depression by the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, it will be tagged as a 2026 storm. Just a little fun fact there. But the good news is this is in the middle of nowhere. It's not impacting anybody, but it's neat to see a system forming in the middle of winter. This is like getting a system in the Atlantic in January, like we had a couple of years ago in 2023. It's not all too common that you see that happen in this part of the world. Now, this is induced by a pattern that's helping the Western Pacific to fire up quite a bit. And you can see that if we look at the broad scale view of the tropical Western Pacific this morning, you can see a lot of convection across this entire region of the world. And that's because we have the MJO, Madden-Julian Oscillation, which is a pocket of rising air that progresses east across the planet with time. And right now, it's firing up in the Western Pacific. And With that, we have a lot of westerly flow across the equator. That's what's helping that invest in the southern hemisphere form. But that's all the air rushing into this zone because we have a lot of rising air across this part of the world. And when this meets up against the easterly trade winds further north, you get a belt of counterclockwise spin, which is cyclonic spin, and that helps form areas of low pressure, which can help form in the tropical cyclones. And that's what we're seeing right now happen in the Philippine Sea. It's hard to pick out much rotation right now because it is nighttime when I'm recording this in the Philippine Sea. But you can see a lot of disorganized showers of storms across this region, aiding low pressure development. And models are in pretty much genuine consensus, not genuine, I'm trying to find the right word to unanimous agreement. That's what it is for the system forming into a tropical system as it tracks further northwest towards the Philippines and Taiwan. You can see the environment being favorable if we look at the GFS. Let me go back to where it is today. You can see this is by Wednesday morning local time, and you can see we have this very strong belt of northerly flow just east of it, but directly over it we have some pretty light flow and actually high pressure that is beginning to build in this region directly on top of it. You'll see that develop as we go in time on this model run. We have this clockwise flow develop a little bit north displaced of the system. This might impart initially a little bit of northeasterly shear, but it does get a bit better coupled as it tracks northwest. And this would be a case where you have not too much shear impacting the system as it comes northwest, and it would be able to intensify as a tropical storm, but potentially a typhoon as it comes into the northern Philippines or southern Taiwan. There is a little bit of track uncertainty right now, which is to be expected at this range because we don't actually have a formed area flow pressure yet, but it does seem likely, just based on current global model guidance, that we'll have a tropical storm intensifying as it comes west into Eastern Asia later this week into this weekend. You can see this is by Saturday local time. This is a intensifying typhoon by that point. Now, for track wise, there is a little bit of uncertainty north south, how far north or south it is, and that will dictate heavily who gets the strongest impacts relative to Taiwan or the Philippines. But regardless, this is going to be a fairly broad system. You can see the influence of the convection right now is very broad. So the exact center track of this may not ultimately matter, as even if it takes the direct middle path, we'll likely have strong, heavy rainfall in the northern Philippines and unfortunately in Taiwan, where we don't really need too much more rainfall. And you can see this in the GFS ensemble forecast. This is showing you the average rainfall over the next 7 days from the GFS ensemble, which is about 31 different members, 31 different runs of the GFS averaged out. And you can see if the center takes a track like this, you have that flow, the westerly flow on the south side butting up against the terrain in the Philippines. So we get very heavy rainfall on the western coast of the Philippines. And with that easterly flow on the north side, you get very heavy rainfall on the eastern side of Taiwan. And that leads to likely flooding issues across both regions as this system comes ashore. Now, it won't be done by that point. It will likely be tracking west into the South China Sea as it gets caught underneath a strong ridge over central China. And models are in general agreement that this ridge will catch it and it won't be able to escape further north with this upper trough, which is weakening over northeast China. And you can see that happen in the GFS. It tracks west into the South China Sea. Now, exactly how much intensification we see here is dependent on where it comes in relative to Taiwan and the Philippines. If it comes further north like the GFS shows here, then we may not have all too much time for intensification, and that would be the good scenario here in the South China Sea. That would be a weaker storm in all likelihood coming into China. But if it is further south, and we can see this a little bit in some of the GFS ensemble spread, if it does come further south, we may have potential for more intensification as the environment is forecast to remain generally favorable for the system. You can see all this divergence west of it, which may favor intensification if it remains over water for a longer period of time. And that could lead to a stronger typhoon coming into southern China here. Of course, there's a lot of questions to be answered by this point, and there's nothing concrete here, but certainly something to pay attention to if you're here in Taiwan, the northern Philippines, and southern China, that we may likely have an intensifying tropical storm or typhoon coming into the region by this weekend and into early next week. You can see by the points in southern China on this forecast, this is Sunday morning local time, and it may be pushed back about a day if it is further south for landfall timing. But again, broad influence, so it is going to be bringing impacts over a wide region even before the center of the storm makes landfall anywhere. And you can see again in this forecast some elevated rainfall totals across southern China. It's a bit more spread out in this because we do have that increased spread with time in the GFS ensemble. But you can see the potential for heavy rainfall is there, and flooding especially is a threat here as the system does come in. And I'll have more videos on this as it does track northwest and develops in real time. That's all that I've got for all these systems. Stay safe in all the areas that are going to be impacted by these storms over the coming days. And like I said, I'll have more videos on most of these systems over the coming days. But that's all for now. Thanks for watching.